Alrighty, I think we're live. Can you guys hear me? Got a few people watching, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. Welcome back. My name is Carl Hamouche. I'm the founder of, which side is it on? SwimSmart. And today we're going to talk about the biology of swimming and how training makes the swimming machine better, right? So, where this came from, I wrote a book when I kind of started it when I was in med school called The Biology of Swimming. Didn't finish it for a few years. It took a little while, but we're basically going to take kind of snippets throughout the book. That's what this presentation is for. So it might seem a little disjointed and discombobulated because it's coming from many places in the book. And if you want to go deeper into these topics or you want the full spectrum, really recommend the book. And it looks big and like a fat textbook, but I'll show you it's actually more of a picture book. So if you just flip to any page, you get pictures. Flip of more pages, pictures, more pages, pictures, right? So it's not all words actually. It's I tried to do my best to take high level exercise science and make it accessible to the swim coach so that you could teach it to your swimmers, teach it to your parents, right? And we're going to talk about all this and more today. So let's get started. I got to get my pen. Actually, first I need to move myself out of the way. Not that one. This one. Move myself out of the way. Sorry, someday we'll have a fancy studio and a person in the back, like a Jamie on Joe Rogan doing all the stuff. So for now, it's all done by hand. So I'll show you at the end where you can get the book, the course, many other stuff. But if you don't follow us to the end, just make sure you use the code webinar20 to get 20% off, not just the book, but a lot of the products that we have. And, we want to partner with you, make your swimming season the best it can be, or at least the smartest it can be, right? So this is me. I did a bunch of studying. I did some coaching. I still do some coaching, wrote books, made inventions. That's not what we're here for. But that's just in case you've never heard of me and this is your first time listening to me. So before we dive into things, I always like to start with where are we actually going? Because if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up in nowhere, right? So to me, if you're a coach and you're learning this stuff on your own, you're putting in some time and some effort, why is that? I think the biggest reason is you want to build trust for your swimmers in you, right? So that they know what you're talking about and that they know what they're doing actually matters, right? So you're going to ask them to put in a lot of hard work, a lot of early mornings, a lot of weekends. And when the going gets tough, they want to be able to have a leader that they can trust. And if you sound and look and know what you're talking about and can explain things and can answer their questions, they're going to put in 100% effort, right? But if they feel like they can't get that, then you may not get that. And we don't want that, right? And then every set, to me, whenever I write a set or if I'm explaining a set, I think it should have a focus and you should be able to say what this set is improving in your race, in your biology, in your mentality, stuff like that, right? So my goal here is to give you some answers. So a kid says, why are we doing 500s on 7 minutes? I can barely breathe. I barely get a few seconds. Why am I doing that? That sounds boring and lazy, but there is a purpose, right? There is a biological need to do that kind of training, and hopefully you'll have those kind of answers at the end of this talk. So we're going to go through a little bit of how the body responds to training, and then after that we're going to look at a sample set and we're going to work backwards. So a sample set, we're going to say, okay, what training zone does that fit in? And I'm very simple. We're only going to do 4. I know some people have many layers of training zones. I'm a simple guy. I can't go that deep. And then we're going to describe which of the biology that it improves. And obviously there's a lot of overlap in these things. So one training zone is going to improve many things, but it's going to improve one thing the most, and that's what we're going to focus on. So if a kid comes to you and says, why am I swimming 8,000 yards today? It's because we want your mitochondria to be the best they can be. And although it is going to improve their heart and their nerves and all these other and their muscles, We want to focus down and narrow things down, right? So obviously the best workout, and this is is you swim fast, you swim faster, and then you just repeat, right? Okay, just a joke. But really the best workout is the one the kids believe in, and that's what we're gonna try to accomplish here today. So before we get into that, like, how does this actually work on a biological level, right? All we're trying to do with training is to send signals, right? And we're sending signals to the DNA, like all the way down to the fabric of every cell. And different training will send different signals, which will produce different results. Obviously, that sounds like an obvious statement, but I actually want to walk you through the biology, at least at a simple level, of how that works. So let's say we're going to do some sprint training and endurance training. And these are your genes. So genes is, if you've forgotten from high school biology, genes are parts of the DNA. Let's see if I can use my mouse to spell. Okay, so they're different parts of the DNA. These are all your AC, all your nucleotides in here. And different genes code for different proteins. So you have a myosin gene, you have an actin gene, you have a bunch of mitochondria genes, but I kind of lumped them all into one. And each training is going to give a signal to certain genes. So sprint training is really going to focus on actin and myosin. Actin and myosin are the building blocks of muscle. That's the muscle proteins that they crawl on each other, and that's what makes muscles contract. And endurance training, for instance, is going to really focus on mitochondria genes. So if you do a lot of endurance training, you're going to get a lot of activation of the mitochondria DNA, and you're going to start getting a lot of mitochondria protein, okay? And same with sprint training for the actin and myosin. Obviously there is overlap, but we're talking in more focused terms. So the DNA codes for proteins, and that's what you make here. And initially these proteins come out kind of separated. So they're like Lego blocks, right? And they're spread out, they're not put together. So you might have a group of myosin Lego blocks, you'll have a group of actin Lego blocks, right? These proteins are all disassembled, and then you have to put them together, and this is all very complex, and we don't really care about the complexity, but you put them together, and that's what makes your final structure, whether it's more muscle, more mitochondria, more capillaries, more heart, more this, more that, that's basically what it comes down to. So I think for you always want to relate that the training is a signal to produce an effect, right? So we're doing this type of training to produce this type of change, which will produce this effect, and that's what will make us swim faster. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of it. So we're going to go through the different types of training. We'll go through them one by one and see how they actually affect your swimming machine at the biology level. And if you have questions as we go along, at least in the live, try to hit me up in the chat and let me know. So I simplify things into endurance and sprint, and then I split those into just two zones each. So this gives us our four training zones. So on the endurance side, we have aerobic endurance, and I'll give you examples of what that all looks like. Aerobic power. So endurance is like your 500 plus feeling. So it's kind of you're swimming constantly at kind of a higher speed with very little rest. Aerobic power is like your 200 pace. So I'll show you a set for that. Then on the sprinting side, we have lactate tolerance. So this is your like hundreds all out, like you're just dead at the wall. You can't move another inch. Speed training is 25s and below. Very, very fast, top speed level stuff, right? So what do they all actually train? Like if I had to choose one thing that all of these things train, this is the summary statement here. Aerobic endurance, again, this is like 500,000 a mile type feeling. This is going to work on your mitochondria the most, right? So your ability to take in oxygen, use it to burn fuel, and use it to generate energy without acid, right? That's what we work on when we do aerobic endurance training. When we do aerobic power, this is like your 200 sets or your 200 feeling. So usually it's like a 1-to-1 swim to rest ratio. So, if you're a 2-minute 200 freestyler, you're doing 50s on a minute holding 30 seconds, if that makes sense. And what this is going to work on is your VO2 max. And we're going to go into a little bit more depth on all of these, but this is the summary. VO2 max is basically your cardiovascular system. So your heart, cardio, vascular are your blood vessels and capillaries. So 200 pace aerobic power works on how big your heart is, how much blood you can pump, and how good you can deliver it to where it needs to go. Muscles, skin, that sort of thing. Lactate tolerance really works on the muscles themselves, so a lot of hypertrophy and buffering. So hypertrophy is a fancy word for making your muscles bigger. That doesn't really happen in swimming because we do so much aerobic endurance training at the same time, so that kind of evens things out and we don't gain quite as much muscle from this. But if you ever see a bodybuilder in the gym, they basically live in lactate tolerance. That's like all they do. And so you'll see them just doing rep after rep after rep until they can't do anymore. And even when they fail, they have a spotter that keeps pushing them and pushing them. And so that's what lactate tolerance do. We do a little bit of in swimming, and I want to explain kind of where that fits in. And the last one here is speed. It's so short. It's so minuscule in the amount of yards that you do. You have so much rest. It really doesn't improve muscles. It doesn't improve the heart. It really works on the nervous system. So for me, speed training is a software programming type of training, right? So we can't neglect the rest and just do this, at least in my opinion. Maybe some others will disagree. But it kind of brings all of the rest together so that the body functions in an optimum way and in the most coordinated way. So again, these are kind of examples of sets that go into all of these. So an aerobic endurance set would be 10 200s on a 230 interval. You're barely getting any rest. 10 seconds, 15 seconds of rest, and then you're going again. So you're almost constantly swimming, and you're just making the interval. Aerobic power is more rest, more speed. So 10 100s on 2 minutes, and you're trying to hold 60 seconds. Or if you're fat and old like me, like 10 25s on, I don't know, 30 seconds, try to keep them under 15. So lactate tolerance, this is where you're going all out for a long time, 50s, 75s, 100s even, and you're going to have a very long rest. So you're going to sprint the whole way, and by the end of the 100 or 50, you can't move anymore. And then speed is 25s or less. Usually we add some resistance, whether it's parachutes or power towers or a partner hanging onto your leg. Again, we're going all out, but it's such a short distance. We're really maximizing the nerves and coordination rather than the muscles or anything like that. So let's dive a little deeper. Maybe if I need a drink. Okay. So aerobic endurance, I won't reiterate what we said here. It has kind of different names, whether it's threshold training or volume. Some of the older guys, they might recognize the EN1, EN2 type setting. But I made this chart. I really want to spend time on this chart here. I made this chart to kind of get you in the idea of like where this fits on multiple like ways of feeling it. So let's start here. So this is easy swimming here. This is going all out. So this is your speed basically. And on the left side is heart rate. On the right side is your rate of perceived exertion. Basically, it's a pain scale of a scale of 1 to 10. And then in the middle, you have a third or another line, which is your VO2, right? So this type of swimming sits kind of right in the middle. And it's right at your lactate threshold. So what that means is your lactate threshold is, it's not a lactate level, it's not an acid level. What it is a speed that you can swim for a very long period of time, or about 40 minutes, I should say. So basically your mile. So if you put a swimmer in the mile and they're holding hundreds at a minute 20, that's their lactate threshold, basically. And where does that fit in relation to all these other variables that I have on the graph? So for VO2, which is your ability to consume oxygen, it's like 75% of VO2 max, right? So it's not a maximum of the VO2, which is up here, and that's the different training, but it's about 75%. If we take this to the left, for a heart rate, we're looking in the 160, 170 range. Obviously, that changes a little bit with age. And then if you take it to the right, that takes you to like a 6 or a 7 on the pain scale, right? So I'm trying to give you an idea like, okay, I'm a coach. I want to write an aerobic endurance set. What should that look like? How should it feel to the swimmer? And you can explain this like, hey, if you take a second, or like when you're in the middle of the set, if you take your heart rate, this is kind of where we want to be. If you were to be asked on a scale of 1 to 10, this is where you kind of want to be. And these are, relatively accurate. And so you don't need fancy, blood draws and looking at lactates and all this, putting somebody up to a snorkel mask and measuring their oxygen intake and out. Like we can do this just on deck, pretty chill. So this is where aerobic endurance kind of how it should feel to everybody. So how does it improve, or how much does it improve the mitochondria? These numbers are, oops, I'm a little in the way. That's okay. So, some of the studies say you can improve your mitochondria 50 to 300%. Obviously, these are like big, this is kind of a big range of numbers. So it probably depends on what you started with, whether it was a couch potato or like an Olympic level athlete. And what it does, it increases the size and the number of the mitochondria. So if this is my schematic here of a mitochondria. It's like a cell within a cell. So it's got its own border, and it's got all these like squiggly proteins on the inside. And if you zoom in, you can see that these proteins are made up of smaller proteins and enzymes and channels, and it basically regenerates ATP. Well, before training, you have a little bit of it, but after training, obviously, you can see you have many more squiggles, and you have a whole new set of proteins and enzymes and channels that weren't there before. So this kind of in training doesn't just improve the mitochondria you have, but it will also give you a whole like more mitochondria. So you'll actually start to generate more. And these are really big structures in the cell. They're very complicated, and so they take a very long time to build. And that's why when we do this type of training, we have to do so much of it. That's why swimming, especially as an endurance sport, you have to do so much of this type of training because it takes so long to build these things. And you want to keep sending the signal like, hey, I need more mitochondria. I need more mitochondria. And that's how we do it with aerobic training. And what they've actually shown as well is that mitochondria kind of respond to ATP. So ATP is that it's like money in the cell. It's like energy money in the cell, right? And when ATP drops a little bit, the mitochondria kick in and they start increasing ATP levels. When you're out of shape like me, it takes a long time when workout starts. It takes a long time for the mitochondria to get the message to kick in and start making ATP. And even when they do kick in, they don't generate a lot, right? They're not powerful enough. It's not a good power plant. As you train, and this is our after graph, as you train, not only will the mitochondria, they'll kick in sooner rather than waiting forever, but they'll obviously be able to generate a lot more, right? And then you get more energy from this very efficient system burning fat and sugar at the same time. So it has a better sensitivity to dropping energy levels, and it maximizes much higher. So this is all around great. Another thing that endurance training, or especially aerobic endurance training, helps is with blood volume. I kind of harp on this a lot. If you've watched some of these videos, am I in the way again? Alrighty, very good. Out of the way. You don't have enough blood in your body to send everywhere. So most of the capillaries, or the little blood vessels in your skin or in your gut, in your kidneys, in your liver, in your muscles, especially your muscles, a lot of them are closed because you have so much pipe space available in your body that if they were all open, you wouldn't be able to fill them all. And so your blood pressure would drop to 0 and you would die, which is bad. And we don't want that. But with aerobic endurance training, you're trying to send blood to all these different muscle groups, and you're pretty hot, so you're trying to send it to the skin, which cools you down, and your body just it wants to be able to do that better. So in order to do that better, it increases blood volume. So if you're a couch potato like me and you're sitting here and then you go for a swim, within even just a few days, this happens very, very quickly. Within a few days, your blood volume will hit a new high. It'll go up. And if you ask your swimmers to notice, if you tell them to pay attention when they come in from the off season, those first few days, they'll be really thirsty, obviously, but they won't pee as much. And so they're holding on to a lot of water. And this can actually not cause, but it can, if you took their blood in this time frame, it would look anemic, right? It would look like they don't have enough red blood cells in their blood because they've diluted it with so much water. Eventually that repopulates and the red blood cells come back. This is called athlete's anemia. It's not an abnormal thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that if you train and you add heat, if you don't have control over your like pool temperature and you have to train in a hot environment, this also stimulates the blood or your body to increase blood volume, because the skin, you have to send blood not only to your muscles, but you have to send it to your skin, and your body wants to have enough to send it to all those places. The reason I mentioned this is not to convince you to make your pool hot. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. There's trade-offs to all these things. But in case you are forced to train in a hot pool, this gives you an explanation or a reason to tell your swimmers like, hey, this is actually a good thing and it's going to help you swim faster. The last point on this page is that when training, everything in the body, if it comes in fast, it goes fast, right? So these changes happen within days and even 1 week. And when you stop training, if kid goes on vacation for a week, they lose a lot of blood volume pretty quickly. So they dry out basically. And when they come back from vacation, they may feel like they took a big step backwards and that they're really struggling. You just get to reassure them like, hey, then just give it a few days, let your blood volume kick back up, and you'll join the rest of the group. You're not as far behind as you think you are. So maybe just a point of help. Okay, what does aerobic endurance not improve? We're not going to spend this much time on all of the training zones, but this is kind of the most important one for swimmers. So what does it not improve? The way your muscles work is that you have like your bicep is composed of thousands of muscle fibers, right? When you activate a muscle fiber, it's fully activated and it's contracting. So the question is, well, why don't I punch myself in the face every time I scratch my nose? That's because we don't activate all the muscle fibers all the time. You only activate them one at a time or a few hundred at a time, and you activate more and more and more as needed. So, or as the requirement to do more work increases. So if you're swimming at an easy pace here, you're only going to activate a few muscle fibers, and usually it's the same muscle fibers, and they're the big like slow twitch fibers. It's not the fast twitch ones at the end of the spectrum. And as you go faster and faster in your swimming or weightlifting or whatever, you recruit and you add on top of the previous muscle fibers more muscle fibers. Aerobic endurance training is relatively slow, so we're not going at all-out speeds. We're not even going at 200 pace speeds. And so what that means is that we're only activating your lower threshold motor units or muscle fibers. And what that means is that we're not activating the higher ones. So the big fast twitch fibers that require you to have like a heavy weight in order to activate them, they never get activated. And a key thing in all of biology is that if you're not activating it, if you're not using it, you're not improving it, right? So if all you did was go run every day, that your arms are not going to get stronger. I mean, they might get a little stronger because you're kind of waving them around, but they're not really going to be optimized, right? You're training your legs, not your arms. inside every muscle, you have the same thing. If all you did was train slowly, you would only train the slow muscle fibers, and you never train the higher ones. So another reason for why we can't just end all our training with just swimming as many yards as possible. Sometimes we have to go fast in order to activate these higher threshold ones, and get them trained up and get them better so that we can swim faster. Okay, let's move on to aerobic power. So again, this is our 200 pace, kind of a 1-to-1 rest to swim ratio. And we're coming back to this graph. At this point, we're coming a little faster. So now we're at the 100% VO2 max, the VO2 max threshold. Heart rate is 175, 180, 190. So it's really pushing it. Like this is a pretty high heart rate if you're going to hold this for a relatively long period of time. On the pain scale, we're kind of in the 8-ish range. So we've kind of moved up our speed. We've given a little rest, and we're going to see how this affects the swimming machine. So VO2, let's explain a little bit what VO2 is. VO2 means volume of oxygen. So we measure gases in terms of volume, and if you put somebody up to like a snorkel and you measured all the gases that they're taking in and the gases they're taking out, the amount of oxygen they're taking in processing, this is their VO2, and the maximum VO2 is the maximum that they can do. So what are the things that go into VO2? There's three main items. There's your ability to carry the oxygen, which is your red blood cells, RBC. There's your ability to pump the blood and get it moving around, so this is your heart. And then there's your ability to extract the oxygen from the blood and actually use it, and that's your mitochondria here, okay? So whatever these things improve, that's what improves your VO2 max. And this is like exercise specific. It is stroke specific. So somebody who has a very high VO2 max as a cycler, like a Tour de France cycler, is not going to have a high VO2 max for swimming. And I think I go through that, but in case I don't, I want to make sure that you understand that. So VO2 max is not and I'll specify it, like if you have a high VO2 max as a freestyler, it doesn't mean you have a high VO2 max as a breaststroker. And so these things are not always, they don't always fill in the gaps all across the board, which is why we have to train all these different things if we want to get better at them. Again, it just refers back to that. The more specific you can be in your training, the better you'll get. So the most improvement, if I had to choose one of these that is the most important or that's the most adaptable, it's the heart pumping, the cardiovascular system. So the heart and the blood vessels. All these other things, they change a little bit. Mitochondria change a little bit, mostly with the aerobic endurance stuff that we talked about. But even then, this is a lot of genetics for mitochondria. And RBCs, there's just so much, there's only so many like red blood cells you can put in your blood, and then you kind of tap that out. So the biggest thing is your heart. So how does your heart actually improve? It can get bigger, right? So athletes have much bigger hearts, and if you simplified the heart into just this like balloon, it has 4 chambers, it has all this kind of circuitry, it's a really cool organ, but for our purposes, we just want to simplify it. So let's say the heart is just this balloon. Blood comes in from one side, it expands the balloon, and then it gets squirted out the other when it gets squeezed, right? The bigger our heart is, the more blood that can come in. This is called preload, and the more blood that we can pump out. Great, right? This is called stroke volume. So normally stroke volume, a couch potato like me is like 70 milliliters per heartbeat. So my heart every second or so is squirting out 70 milliliters. With training, like a very high-end training, like an Olympic level swimmer, rower, cross-country skiers, these are usually the ones who have the highest VO2s that are measured. You can get that, you can basically double it to 150 milliliters, so quite a bit. Cardiac output is just how many liters you can pump in a minute, right? So a couch potato like me, if I'm doing like full on exercise, I can pump 20 liters of blood in 1 minute. An athlete will do like 35. So again, it kind of doubles. And so that's like the most important thing that's going to change. On the other end of the spectrum, okay, so we have a bigger pump, but we want to be able to send it to more places, more muscle fibers. And so if we zoomed in on these little boxes are muscle cells. How do I spell muscle cells? And then you can see that the red are the capillaries. So capillaries are the very, very tiniest blood vessels that we have. Only one red blood cell can fit into a capillary. And at the before training time, we don't have very many capillaries because our muscles don't really need that much. They don't need that much oxygen. They're not producing a lot of acid and carbon dioxide, so they don't need that much blood flow. So we have just a few capillaries here, kind of around the muscle cells, and then blue is veins. This is going to go back to the heart up top. As you train, like that burning sensation in your muscles, that's your muscles. I mean, it is acid, but it's also your muscles like not being able to produce enough energy. They need more oxygen. They're producing too much acid. They need to get rid of it. And so they secrete a hormone called VEGF, which is this vascular endothelial growth factor. So, and it secretes, it's very local. It's not a hormone that goes off into the body. It's very local in the muscles. And what this does is it stimulates and signals for more capillaries to be generated and to grow. And it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to really fully maximize this, at least, from couch potato to relatively healthy person. So that's why we also have to do quite a bit of this training, and we have to wait, and that's why it takes a little while to see the full improvements. But the more highways that we have around our blood vessels, the better we're going to be able to deliver the oxygen. And again, if you can deliver it well, then you can extract it well. And that's what improves VO2. So that's what improves that equation, if that makes sense. All right, let's get to the painful stuff here. This is our lactate tolerance. So, I'm sure every coach in the world, all Saturday mornings is filled with great sets of hundreds and, 75s and 50s of sprinting from the blocks. And this is kind of how we should all feel at the end of these sets. And let's see how it's somewhat simpler than the endurance side of things, but the big thing is that we're gonna improve the buffering capacity and a little bit of size. So what do I mean by buffering? So when you're swimming this fast, you have to use the glycolysis system. We did a deep dive talk into energy systems, so I won't do that here again. But glycolysis produces a lot of acid, and acid is hydrogen. So little hydrogen protons, these start to build up in the muscle cell, and then they leak out into the blood, and then you end up breathing them. You breathe them out. And in order to last a little bit longer in a race, you want to be able to kind of sponge up the extra hydrogens and get rid of them. So there's kind of three main mechanisms that the body does that. Bicarbonate is one. Creatine phosphate. So this is an enzyme in your muscle cells and some other organs, but mostly in muscle cells. And it's the same creatine that you buy at the store. If you go to the GNC and you look at creatine, that's actually what you're like consuming. It's that enzyme, and then or it's a compound. I'd have, there's several different ways it comes out, but and the other one is protein. So just the straight actin and myosin act as like a sink for acid, which is why when bodybuilders do this kind of training, they're stimulating their body to grow bigger and bigger muscles so that they could keep sequestering the acid that they're producing. Bicarb, I skipped this. This is basically Tums, right? So if you go to the store and you buy Tums or some antacid, it's sodium bicarbonate. So all of these, as you stimulate as you dump all this acid into the muscles, your muscles always want to counteract and they want to improve things. And so they start to build up all these three different things so that you have a little bit less acid going through so that you can last a little bit longer in a race. I mean, it might just be an extra 10 seconds of, top speed towards the end of the race, but that can make a big difference in your 50 and 100 times, I should say. It does like do some like growth, some hypertrophy of the muscles, but it's not really big in swimming, so we don't have to go into that too much. Okay, last one here is sprint training or speed training. So very short distances, very long rests, throwing in some resistance to kind of stimulate as much nervous system recruitment as we can. So going back to this graph that we mentioned, as we start to get to the all-out phase of swimming, we've started to recruit all the available muscle fibers, right? So now we're training everything. And with speed training, we're coordinating them. So we're trying to get the technique down, and because we don't produce very much acid and we're not really getting a maximum heart rate or maximum oxygen use, it doesn't really train any of the other things. So here is where I think I'd mentioned it before that, well, let me see here. Okay, no, this is something else. So your body is designed to be very conservative. It wants to rest rather than spend, and it wants to protect itself from damaging itself. So a lot of people your muscles are actually strong enough, a lot of us, to tear themselves apart. A lot of times, so I'm a radiologist, so I spend my time at the hospital looking at x-rays and CTs and MRIs. Many fractures that we see are not actually of like the bone being chopped in half. A lot of them are avulsions, so the muscle and the tendon have actually pulled a piece of bone off and because they're so strong and so tightly knit to the bone, that they're actually stronger than the bone itself. And so your body before training, where'd my mouse go? There it is. Okay. Before training, it doesn't want to activate all the muscle fibers you have, right? It has all these inhibitory signals from the nervous system, usually from the brain, so that even if you were to say go all out, it's not going to activate all of the muscle fibers. So here, in my example, this is a latissimus muscle. This is the big armpit muscle here. And I divided it into 10 motor units. Motor units are a group of muscle fibers. So motor units, muscle fibers for our purposes are interchangeable. And if I were to go all out like a couch potato, I would only activate, the even number muscle fibers, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, right? Even if I was going as fast as I could, I can't activate them all at the same time because my body is saying, Carl, you're weak. If you do that, you're going to hurt yourself and it's not going to be good. But as we train and as we get better, we can actually disinhibit or we can remove those safeties, and the body will learn to use all of the muscles or more of the muscle fibers. And so even though you have the same weight of muscle, it's producing more energy, producing more power, and it's actually you can go faster with the same number of muscles. So that's really what we're training here. We're trying to train the nerves to coordinate, but also to take the safeties off. And you might wonder, like, how do we actually know this happens? So there was a very interesting research study done a while back where they took a bunch of untrained people like me, and they took half of them and they hypnotized half of them, and they told them under hypnosis that they can actually lift more than they think they can, like they're strong and this and that. And immediately, and they compared them to the people who they didn't do that to, and the people who were hypnotized could lift more weight than the people who were not hypnotized. But if you took an athlete and you did the same thing, they saw no effect. Those two groups of people, hypnotized and unhypnotized athletes, could lift the same amount of weight already, which means that at the nervous level, their nerves were already like unlocked, and they were already, and the safeties were already off, and they were already maximizing the most coordination that they could. So I don't know, just kind of an interesting thing to talk about. So this is a bit longer talk than my usual ones, but if you've got time or you want to come back to it, we can talk about a few more things. I think I got a little bit about dryland and taper. So we're going to keep going and finish this up. Oh, technique. Yeah, we have to learn about how you actually learn technique, right? So not all training is sprinting and endurance. We also train technique, and we have to get better at actually moving through the water. So that has a biological basis as well. It doesn't just like happen. It doesn't just happen on its own. So technique in the biology world is called a motor pattern. So that's the fancy word. But if you hear the word motor pattern and you just think in your head technique, same thing. Some motor patterns are actually hardwired into us at birth. So walking, running, even swimming, some rudimentary ways of swimming, we're actually born with that ability. We can't do them yet because our muscles kind of suck when we're babies, and we have to grow into them a little bit. But most other motor patterns, whether it's playing the piano, swimming butterfly, doing a flip turn, those have to be trained. And what that looks like at the biological level is that in the brain is a bunch of neurons, right? And these neurons talk to each other through big long arms called axons. But many of the neurons are not talking to each other. And so you don't have this coordination and you don't have this programming built. But as you practice and practice and practice, you turn what is conscience into unconscious. And that happens through these new connections between nerves. So now they're starting to talk to each other a little bit better, and they're saying, hey, when you do this, I'm going to do that, and you do that when I do this. And that eventually comes together as a whole motor pattern. Okay? And whether you learn good motor patterns or bad motor patterns, that's what's going to stick, and that's what's going to be left in your brain. So that's why it's so important to harp, especially on little kids, about their technique, because as they're still soft Play-Doh, you can still, shape their technique, but eventually that's going to solidify and harden. It's going to be much more difficult later on to adjust their technique. But on a biological level, this is kind of what's happening. We can actually dive in a little deeper. This is a very simplified schematic of a brain. So if I were to draw the brain out like this is actually kind of where this happens. So the motor cortex it's the cortex. It's the outer part of the brain, kind of right in the middle here. So these nerves talk directly to the muscles, they talk to a nerve in the spine, and then that nerve talks to the muscles. But this is a simplified version. And so when you activate, like close your fists, it starts up here at the motor cortex, and then it sends a signal down to the muscles, and then those muscles contract. And if you don't have a motor pattern, you have to physically or mentally, well, actually it's both, mentally and physically, you have to control all those little movements. But your brain is it's very programmable. And so after a time of doing the same motion over and over, if I'm doing butterfly over and over, at first I have to really think about it, but eventually it will start to create a pattern, and it will start to know the pattern. And instead of activating the muscles directly in this line, what it will do is it will activate the pattern. It will say, do butterfly. And so that pattern goes to a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. Basal means base, and ganglia means group of neurons. So this is really in the center of your brain. And here is where we house these patterns of technique, playing piano, all these different things. And the basal ganglia will actually re-talk to the motor cortex with the instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then the motor cortex will automatically do it again. So we have this big revolving things. These things talk to each other all the time in this way to get your brain what it wants to do to the message to the muscles to actually do that thing. Well, on the other end of the spectrum, we have signals that are coming from the bottom up, right? So these are sensory signals which come from many things like your eyes, your skin, the feel on your skin. Your muscles have stretching sensors, so you can tell how extended or how contracted your muscles are without looking. Your joints have sensors to tell your brain like what angle they're at. And all of these signals go up through the spinal cord, and they come to a portion of the brain called the thalamus, which is right next to the basal ganglia. And the thalamus kind of coordinates all these jumbled signals into one cohesive message, and it sends it up to the cortex of the brain, and that like gives you awareness of what your body is actually doing. Okay. Why is this important? Why is it important to know all of this? Why am I going into such detail? Because just because your brain sent a motor pattern, just because it said, hey, do butterfly, that's only saying what should happen. It's not saying what actually happened. What actually happened comes from the sensory signals. And this is what did happen. And a lot of times these are not the same, right? They don't perfectly overlap. And there's a mistake. The brain said to do one thing, the muscles did another thing, or you were too tired, or you missed the wall, or you touched with one hand instead of a two-hand touch, or you did an open turn instead of a flip turn. And so what happens is the cerebellum is what is it, Latin? I think it's Latin or Greek for little brain. So it's a little brain here at the back, and it gets a copy of both things. It gets a copy of what should have happened from the top of the brain, and it gets a copy of what did happen from all your sensors, and it does a comparison, and it compares any mistakes that happened along the way. And if there were mistakes, it sends signals for corrections. So it's like a teacher. It marks up your paper and it says, no, you got question 2 wrong, and you get a B, not an A. And so the things get more complicated. So now the cerebellum, it received signals from the sensation, it received a copy of the motor pattern, and then it compares and it sends corrections. And it sends these corrections, which are the green arrows, to the basal ganglia. And it says, hey, you wrote the wrong program. You need to adjust line 2, step 3, this and that. So the corrected instructions then go back through the cycle up to the motor cortex and then back down to the muscles. And this is how we learn, and this is how we adapt through changes, right? And it's I explain it because I think it's cool. I don't know if it really matters to us on deck, but it's a really sweet programming, and it's what makes swimming, fun to watch. All right, literally last couple slides. We're almost there. I think I talked about taper a few weeks ago as the season was ending for most of us. So just to reiterate, if you want more detail, watch that video. But just to reiterate, the first few days of taper, where'd my thing go? Glycogen starts to regenerate. Glycogen is just another fancy word for sugar in the muscles. It's stored all together, so it's a little bit different compound, but sugar in the muscles, glycogen are almost interchangeable for us. When you're training during the season, your training level is very high. You're doing a lot of yards, you're very intense, we're racing every weekend, and so you're burning a lot of sugar, and so your sugar storage is really chronically pretty low, which is why it's important to kind of maintain your carb intake, especially right after you work out. Again, big nutrition talk, separate talk. You can see that as well. As taper starts, the reverse starts happening. The training volume goes down, and so you're not burning as much sugar, and so that means you're storing a lot more. And this is all inside the muscle cells mostly. And it can increase by, up to 35%. So that's a pretty good amount. Sounds great until you realize that you feel worse in taper, which we call the taper blues. So why do the taper blues happen? I've explained this a few times. Again, this is my theory. I don't know if anyone's done the actual experiment, but it seems to make sense to me. Sugar is not a good storage fuel for the body. That's why it doesn't like to store things as sugar. That's why you get fat. You don't get sugary. You don't get sweeter when you overeat. You get fatter when you overeat. The reason is because 1 gram of sugar comes with 3 grams of water. So it's very waterlogged. It sucks in water. Fat does not like water, so it doesn't come with water, which makes it a better way to store energy. And when you automatically have so much more sugar in the muscle, the muscle cell swells up and gets tighter, and it feels really like heavy and logged down. And so that's what I call the taper blues. But the body's always adapting, it's always changing, and so after about day 5 or so, the muscles have kind of reoriented, and they've been able to take in the sugar and the water, and they can handle it, and then you feel better, and then you swim fast, right? That's kind of what happens. Okay, I'm going to stop talking because it's been a while. Again, we have many books, a couple courses, many swim products. Make sure to use the code webinar20. Thanks so much for joining along and listening to me kind of yammer about a bunch of different topics all around. These are kind of the stuff we've been working on over the last few years. We're using with our swimmers. I just got a message from a coach who's interested in like the push paddle, so they're coming around to everybody. But the idea behind Swim Smart was really to fix swimming problems and get coaches and swimmers engaged in their training. So for instance, push paddle fixes bad dolphin kicking, or the FogX fixes foggy goggles, and I won't bore you with all of this, but if you go to our website swimsmarttoday.com, or you just Google Swim Smart, you can find all these and more. If you ever have questions, you can hit me up at sales@swimsmarttoday.com. Do I have it on here? I don't have it on here. But if you just go to the website and you hit the like chat with me or contact me, hide this one. Contact us or chat. This comes to me. Pretty small business. We're just coaches trying to make a difference, and we appreciate you joining us. So we'll see you at the next one. If you guys have suggestions for what we should talk about, let me know in the comments. Share, like, subscribe, all the usual. Thanks.